really isn't. Because these things don't come about because people decide to wake up one morning and say, we are going to change this government. What happens is that very interested groups, powerful interested groups, plan it. And so whoever is installed owes their mandate to those groups. So they end up having to satisfy those groups. And so that is what they do with their presidency.
The unwieldy political alliances of the two presidents who rallied people power, as well as nearly a dozen coup attempts against the two women, are only some of people power's destructive legacies. Many have said it before, that changing a government is easy compared to the difficult task of actually governing. People power changed the leaders, but each time our nation scrambled to rebuild shattered institutions. The question now is, can we hold back the power play enough to allow nation building, the true spirit of people power, to grow? The answer when people power play returns. People power became a political tool, which was triggered by President Aquino against all three of her successors. She blocked President Ramos from changing the Constitution in what many feared was an attempt to keep himself in power, and she was a key voice in people power too. But there's a major difference between 1986 and 2001 because a protest which brought Mrs. Arroyo to power 7 years ago deposed a duly elected leader, not an overstaying dictator. That key difference would haunt President Arroyo when Mr. Estrada's supporters tried to launch People Power 3 against her. That further blurred the lines between people power and what some international observers called mob rule. This did not surprise Pulse Asia chief Felipe Miranda. During the Senate hearings, he conducted a tracking poll. The results, Mr. Estrada's support level remained at 40%. He gives us an idea of the manipulations behind the scenes, saying he was attacked by some of the men who commissioned the survey.
They did not like it. Sabi, Pepe naman kayo na lang ang natitirang nagsusupport sa kay ERAP. Kako, we are not supporting ERAP. We are reporting our findings. That experience told me that people, so concerned about the ends, would in a Machiavellian way, disregard the means. And these are the people who would be among the most moralistic and such disillusionment.
But that 40% support level explains why Mr. Estrada remains politically significant and why his candidates, including his wife and son, won office.
If people had been very clear about the guilt of ERAP, this thing would not have been possible.
The corruption charges against him centered on huepeng, an illegal numbers game. It did not involve public funds like the corruption charges now facing President Arroyo. To most Filipinos, the corruption that put Marcos into the Guinness Book of Records only seems to have gotten worse.
My administration was not one marked with cover-ups. No contract executed during my administration was subject of any corruption issue. Neither was any member of my cabinet charged with corruption.
For months after Mrs. Arroyo came to power, Filipino society seemed split along economic lines. Mr. Estrada's supporters from the poor, while Mrs. Arroyo had the middle and elite classes. She survived People Power 3, but the damage was done, and she said she was forced to compromise in order to hold her unwieldy coalition together. That made the 2004 elections even more important. She won her own mandate by a slim margin, but even that was challenged after wiretap conversations were released to the media in 2005.
I am sorry.
That raised charges of election cheating, charges Mrs. Arroyo denies.
So will I still lead by more than 1 AM?
But those tapes triggered impeachment processes which have kept her constantly battling. This is a presidency under relentless siege. On the eve of People Power's 20th anniversary, Mrs. Arroyo averted a People Power 4 by declaring a state of emergency.
Nagdeklara ako ng state of emergency dahil sa maliwanag at kasalukuyang banta sa Republika na ating napag-alaman at napigil. Sa mga nagbabalak laban sa bayan, babagsak sa inyong pagtataksil ang buong bigat ng batas.
Police banned political rallies, but not everyone followed. Some respected leaders continued their plans and protested. It turned into a parody of people power when police dispersed them with water cannons and carried out warrantless arrests. Soon after that, a Pulse Asia survey said 65% of Filipinos wanted Mrs. Arroyo to resign.
I don't believe, I don't agree with Romy Neri that this woman is evil. She's not a saint. She's trying to do a job as best she can. I'm not an apologist for her, please. I did not even vote for her. But I can see what she's doing. Let us please not forget that she has done a good job with the economy.
According to the government, 2007 was the best year for the economy in 31 years. Economic growth was 7.3%. The stock market is up, and the peso is at its highest level in 8 years.
Let us put aside partisan wrangling as candidates jockey for the presidency. Let us focus on a common agenda of growth, hope, and opportunity.
But hope is coming from a different place. Nowadays, June Lozada is treated like a rock star.
Hello po, ang cute niyo po.
To a public looking for the truth, he is a savior who tells it like it is.
Nagsabi lang naman ako ng totoo. Siguro, kukunti na lang nagsasabi ng totoo ngayon. No? Kaya pag nagsabi ka ng totoo, bayani ka na.
Sino nagsasabi ng katotohanan?
Filipinos in general tolerates authoritarianism, tolerates certain level of corruption. I put a term to it, permissible. But one thing that the Filipinos will not tolerate is moral bankruptcy. And people power has shown itself as a very effective tool in excising and removing morally bankrupt regimes. And in this particular case, I will not be surprised if the Filipinos use it again.
Now people are back on the streets, but this time there are many demands. And many are tired of people power.
I'm not going to go through another EDSA again until I go through the courts, I get through the legislature. So it's not just Gloria Arroyo's fault. They could have stopped her anytime. That's what the principles of checks and balances are, right? But what are they doing? Excuse me. But I think what they're doing is that they're negotiating. It's a transactional situation. So they've got to stop themselves.
But that won't happen overnight, and the anger is real. Filipinos are united in one thing, a demand for truth.
So what we're seeing now, is it a call for people power, or is it another power play?
I think it is both. But there are, I think, also enough people who, regardless of the power play dimension, are really thinking people power in the original sense of what will enable the national citizenry to get certain political outcomes to come about.
Regardless of the failures of people power to bring better governance, there are two signs of hope today. There's no organizing political figure who stands to benefit from another people power, and there's a spontaneous quality to the protests, just people who have had enough and are not afraid to say so. Perhaps now the stage is set for a rebirth of true people power.
what keeps you optimistic that we'll see this change in our lifetime?
It's